Alrighty everybody, welcome to another late night video explanation here. We are in Unit 5. This is our net worth project. So here we'll be looking at kind of a collective way of thinking about how much it is that we're worth, figuring in the things that we own and the money we have, like investments and cash and things of that nature, along with actual tangible assets like a house or something like that, along with maybe the stuff that we owe. So maybe I have some liabilities, I have some debt, things of that nature, and kind of combining those together. In this project, we will have a number of videos you can check out here, along with some articles to read. And then we have our open-ended questions, which leads us to our guided practice. We're looking at some of the sort of available net worth averages and medians that we see. It's important here to understand the difference between an average and a median. So that's the first thing I kind of have you guys do here. I don't want to give it away in the video, but there's definitely a major difference between those two things, and we want to understand that when we go to look at this data. Next, it brings us to the actual exploration part of the project, and here is where I spent a crazy amount of time building out an entire net worth projection tool here. So I hope you guys enjoy. This is part of the video. I'm going to go in extreme detail on how exactly it is. We're going to change each one of these things. The spreadsheet can seem a little bit scary when you first look at it, but I promise it is very easy to use. So the goal here is just to be able to look at a few different scenarios. The scenarios can change depending on whether you have student loans or not, whether you're going to buy a house or whether you're going to rent, and things of that nature, what your salary is going to be, etc. Each of the different factors are going to have some sort of like levers with them, and I'll explain that in a second. But basically, there are some restrictions here. So one of the big restrictions is I can't make some easy changes later on and say I rent for 5 years and then I go to buy a house. Would that be possible? Give me some more time? Yeah. It's already 1:30 in the morning. I don't have any more time. So we're just going to go with it as is. It is a pretty good tool, but it is kind of like set in its one projection. No one is going to buy a house and live in it for 40 years, except for like a couple people. We're going to buy a house, we're going to live in it for a few years, we're going to move, we're going to buy another one, maybe we'll sell it and rent and buy another one after that. So with that being said, this tool is just, again, for illustrative purposes to give us an idea of what it would be like to kind of buy and own a home versus just rent for the same period of time. It looks at 40 years and it doesn't do well with negative discretionary income. So if you run into a scenario where you're like, I make $35,000 a year, and after I put in my sort of like expected spending, etc., I came out to be negative, you're gonna kind of want to tweak one of those levers, whether it's going to be to pump up your salary or to bring down those expenditures. Again, just kind of make it work for the tool, and it should be close enough that we can kind of at least take something away that's valuable from it. All right, so now let's jump into what each of the different things we have in this tool are. So each of them is highlighted in yellow, and it's an input value. So for student loans, this would be if I went to school, whether trade school or college, and I had some loans afterwards. Okay, this is the loan amount. This is my loan interest rate. For the compounding, this is monthly. So this is basically just going to stay 12 for me. The loan duration could be 10, 15, 20 years, whatever you choose. By default, it's 10, but most people pay it off in 20, and a lot of people will switch to a 30-year option. Just keep in mind, we are paying more interest that way, but it does ultimately bring the loan payment amount down like as a monthly payment. For housing, here we now have two big choices. One is we can buy, or one is that we can rent. So when we're switching between these two things, it's going to switch all the values down here. So I'll just show you highlighted for a second. Here are my housing payments. Starts at $14,000, kind of goes up from there. That's with a renting scenario. And if I change this to buy, it's now going to use all of my house purchase values. So again, these are going to be set. And then once my house is paid off, I'll just be paying property tax. There are some intricacies and stuff in here that are kind of like glossed over, but it does a good enough job for us. So if I choose buy, it basically is going to ignore the rent and the rent inflation. If I choose rent, it's going to ignore everything else. But we want it in there because we want to compare different scenarios. I would recommend, because you guys are going to pick your own scenarios, I would recommend choosing a scenario that has the rent somewhere close to the actual payment on the house. So basically, I would look at the loan payment and I would say, okay, if my loan payment's going to be about $1,200, that's when I'm going to start my rent at. Again, it is totally up to you what you want to do. If you want to leave something flat, then you're just going to change the inflation rate to 0. So if I want it to remain $1,200 for the next 40 years, It's not going to happen. But if you wanted to do that, you just change the inflation rate to 0. With my mortgage here, there's the amount. This is after down payment. So kind of imagine if I was buying a $300,000 house and I was putting in 10% down payment, then it's going to be 30,000. So going into it is now going to be 270. Just as an example there, we would just put the 270 here. I didn't feel it really necessary to put in the whole down payment part because we're kind of just saying, okay, we're going to assume it's this. Maybe you can make an argument that I should, but it is what it is. Again, here's our interest rate there. Compounding monthly is 12. Now here's our duration of the loan. So this is the number of years. Most people do a 30. Some people try to do a 20. Some people do a 15, and a few people do a 10. Obviously 10 is the best option, but it has the highest monthly payment. Here's just the periodic interest. So these red cells are pre-calculated. So these are all formulas for you. Now here's a crazy one we've seen before, which is calculating the loan payment. I'm going to show you another crazy formula that's involved here, but just know that we've seen this one before, and we got one other kind of crazy one in this worksheet here. Home appreciation value is very important because the actual house that we buy is very likely to increase in value. So not only are we buying a thing and we kind of pay this thing off, but that thing is actually increasing in value as we pay it off, which is pretty sweet. For the property tax rate, you could make an argument again that this should increase, but I think for the most part it's fine to leave it flat, and we're just again choose whatever town you want. New Hampshire is obviously higher than other states because we don't have a state income tax or anything like that, but 2.5%, 3%, whatever, 2%, whatever you want to do there is fine, and you can research different towns' tax rates. For salary, we're going to enter our salary, and we're going to put our salary increase rate. So this is kind of the amount we expect to get sort of like as a raise every year. Just keep in mind, like cost of living adjustment, you're probably going to get at least 2 to 3%. So if you think you're going to like really move up your career ladder and it's going to continue on forever at a crazy high rate, I would say like 5 or 6% is definitely on the higher end. If you're switching jobs, that's when you really see the biggest like jump in your pay if I go from like company A to company B, but again, the tool doesn't do an awesome job with that, so we're just gonna kind of use this, and you can kind of like water it down. So instead of saying like, well, I'm gonna get a 10% raise every 3 years, just say like, okay, I'm gonna get a 4% every year, something like that. And then we go to our other expenses, and this is just going to be everything else, so I just call it life. This is food, utilities, car insurance, all that stuff. So again, these values can fluctuate pretty wildly, but just kind of use like old projects, or you can just kind of Google like what is the average American spend, and you can see a breakdown that way. The COLA is just the cost of living adjustment, so this is our basic inflation rate. Tends to be about 3%, but again, you can change it if you want. And then we have our investments category here. So this is going to be us actually saving some money away if we have money to save. So basically, if our discretionary income is 0 or negative, we don't want to have it be negative, but let's say it's 0, it's not going to invest. So just keep that in mind down here. But we would like to say something like, we save 15% of all the money we've kind of saved up by the end of the year, and we want to invest that amount. So when we're doing this, just know that there's a percentage of our discretionary income that we're putting into this, and then there's also the average return. So this is what our actual investments are making, and this is how much we're choosing to invest of our income every year. Now we get to the craziness that is this projection table. Takes our salary, calculates the taxes. Again, this is like one of the gnarliest formulas I've done, so if you want to check that out, there it is. But again, this is all calculated for you. So I've tried to make this really easy to use. So this is doing both federal and payroll taxes, which brings us to our disposable income. Then we have our housing payments and our student loan, and then we have our student loan balance. So this is the now new equation that I'm using. It's the tail end right here. So basically what this is doing is it's calculating based off all the remaining balance stuff on this tab. So this tab explains what this equation is doing, but just kind of trust me for now. It's taking the year by year breakdown as we go through the loan. So this is kind of like at the end of year 1, end of year 2, end of year 3, etc. Any other expenses, that's the stuff we looked at before. Our discretionary income here is just what's going to be left after we've paid these things. So we had our disposable, and we subtract off this stuff, and then we subtract off all of our other expenses as well. So our student loan balance is not being subtracted off because it's just the sort of outstanding what is left to be paid off. The amount invested is again just going to be whatever the percentage we chose of our discretionary income. Our cumulative investments take that, and it basically says, okay, for this year, take what I had last year, make that one grow, and add in this year. So basically when you do that, we're saying, okay, I'm going to have, you know, the previous thing I had plus my new money, and I'm going to grow all that stuff. So as we do that, we'll see that this increases as we go. B44, yeah. Yep, that's my returns. Cool. The home value is going to be, again, whatever we started out with, saying, you know, the home is worth blah, blah, blah. And this is only going to show up if we are buying a home. So if I switch this to renting, my home value and my mortgage balance are going to be zeroed out because I am not buying anything. This is the biggest difference between buying and renting, is that I don't actually have any equity if I rent. I might get a cheaper deal. It might be easier in the short term, but ultimately in the long run, buying a home almost always will win in terms of like net worth stuff. So when we're doing this, just keep that in mind. The other thing to keep in mind here is that when we do buy a house or sell a house, there's a decent amount we're going to pay in commissions and everything. So, ends up being anywhere from 2 to 8%, I would say, depending on whether you're buying or selling. So just keep that in mind, that if we were to like buy and sell a new house every year, we're going to be way worse off than we were renting because we're just paying those fees. And then we get to our actual net worth calculation here. So this net worth is basically just taking what we had in our discretionary income, subtracting off whatever we invested, and then adding in our cumulative investments. So again, this is sort of taking it as we go. So I just don't want to double count that value. So that just takes care of that. It adds in whatever home value we have and also subtracts off anything we have for a mortgage balance. It should also subtract off our outstanding student loans. So let's throw that on there. And we see that we start out negative for a few years, but that is okay because we have invested in our education. And now we see, let's scroll up a smidge here. This is a summary of what we've chosen in the input values here. Okay, so I chose student loans at $35,000. Let's say I go back up here and I say, okay, it wasn't $35,000, it's actually $36,000. Whoa, not 30. There we go. Okay, so $36,000. Then I go back here. Oh, it is automatically updated for me because yours truly has made it such that it is very, very easy for you to take these values and copy them in. That way we can see, okay, let's compare one scenario to another scenario. So this kind of summarizes the scenarios for you. So it just makes it really, really easy. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to start by clicking here, and I would scroll to the bottom. I would hold down Shift, and then I would click again. So what that does is it selects all of these cells from here down. You could also click, hold down Control and Shift, and then just hit the down arrow. So that's going to scoop me right to the end of wherever my cells end at. I'm going to hit Control C to copy this information, and then I'm going to go down here. This is just my example. Your practice scenarios are right here, but mine is right here, and I'm going to go click this top cell. It's kind of formatted weird because my columns are so skinny here, but I'm just going to go Control V, and that's going to paste everything. And you see everything is broken here. You're like, oh my god, Mr. G, this is terrible. Just click this little keyboard right here and paste values only. So I only want to capture the values from this stuff here. I don't want all the cell referencing and all that nonsense. I'm going to do that one more time for you guys, and I'm going to show you a slightly different way of doing it. So I'm going to change one thing. I'm going to do a buy instead of a sell, or a buy instead of a rent. So I'm going to go back over here, copy all this stuff, and I'm going to click right here, and instead of just doing Control V, I'm going to do Control Shift V. Control Shift V automatically does just values. So again, nice little shortcut there for you. So now I can compare between these two things. So I now have my scenarios, which I can like clearly see here. I say clearly, but it's kind of like annoyingly formatted. On the practice scenarios for you guys, the columns are wider, so it's much easier to like read the stuff. Like if I were to paste it here, I would just do the same thing, and we can see it's much easier to read, just as a little FYI for you. So in the scenario, the first one here, I had student loans, $36,000, and I had the same thing here. First one had renting at $1,200 a month, inflating at 2.6. The next one was a $250,000 mortgage at 4% for 30 years, and it increases in value at 3.5%, with 2.5% property tax. So I know if I go back and change one of these things, it's going to automatically be captured here for me. So I can really easily compare, and I can say, okay, food expenses were the same, salaries the same, everything else is the same. The only thing I changed was in the first scenario I rented, and the second scenario I actually bought, right? I purchased this house. So now we scroll down here, we want to check out the net worth difference. For the most part, it's about the same. I actually have a little bit higher net worth renting in the beginning, which is typically what we would see, especially if we included the sort of like commission cost for buying the house. But then as time goes on, we see a pretty dramatic shift here, which is that by buying the house, we have a much higher net worth, even though we may be paying less for housing in terms of the rent. We are ultimately gaining because we have an asset, right? We have purchased a home and now we have equity in this home. So basically now we see, if we project out 40 years, there's a huge difference between buying and owning a home and holding it long term versus renting over the long run. This again will vary place to place, depends on the house. You know, if your house rots and falls to the ground or whatever, then, you know, obviously your house is worth nothing, but houses last a while, especially, you know, we can see some pretty old houses in New England, so you guys have kind of seen that firsthand. This, again, tab that I referenced before is just the math behind the scenes. I just want to show you guys explicitly how it is that I'm able to calculate these balances. So for a certain number of years later, this is just breaking it down by month. So if you really wanted to dig into my equation, you would see it's times 12 to do annually. So when we're looking at this, we're basically saying, okay, let me choose the month. So I want to know what my balance is after 3 months. Boom. This value now matches with this value here. This is how I would do it kind of as a table format, and this is how I can do it in a single formula. This is quick and easy, and I love using that. This is nice to illustrate everything. Again, just want you guys to understand the actual math of what's going on here. Here's the calculation. So the future value of what I want is going to be the present value and then times whatever my, you know, per payment inflation rate is. So this is going to again be adjusted, so it's the periodic interest rate, not like the annual amount. So, you know, monthly, we just take that and divide it by 12, and then we're going to subtract off, and this is going to be our payment amount times, and now again we have another sort of like interest accumulation here. You don't need to fully understand this. I'm not going to like explain everything behind the scenes here, but it's just a good thing to kind of have in the back of our heads in terms of like, oh, if I want to, you know, look at how much a loan is going to be 50 years from now. I don't know why you'd have a 50-year loan, but whatever, right? That we can figure out what that would be. For the actual practice scenarios I have you guys doing, I have you pick the details of the scenarios, but they must fit the criteria below. So scenario 1 must have you buying a home and you must have student loans with it. Scenario 2, you must buy a home but without student loans. This would be a sort of scenario where I'm thinking like I didn't go to college, so maybe I go right from high school, enter the workforce, and whatever. What would be really cool and interesting, and what I hope people do, is with the first scenario, pick a salary that reflects what going to school would be, right? So I can kind of like look at either Bureau of Labor Statistics values, or I can just look at like my expected career with a college degree versus, and then I would choose maybe like a non-college degree career here and look at what that salary would be like. Again, you don't have to do that, but I think that would be the most interesting thing to do. I know it is kind of playing with two different values. One is, you know, with student loans, one's without, and then one is also with a different salary. But I think it's really interesting and compelling there. And then you could do the same thing, hold the scenario the same, except change everything to rent. So I would use the same sort of student loan as you did in scenario 1, and I would use the same salary too. So I would say 2 and 4 salary matchup, 1 and 3 salary matchup. But again, I'm ultimately going to leave it up to you. That's just what I think would be the most interesting. So really easy. You're just going to take the stuff from the tool we've got here. So you guys are going to go in, you know, make all your changes, grab the copy right here, and then paste it right in like you saw me do. I hope that helps and is an interesting sort of, I don't want to say it's like a deep dive into net worth, because we don't talk explicitly about like the specific things that make it an asset or make it a liability. But typically what you want to think about in terms of an asset and liability is asset is something that I buy and I could sell later on, right? Versus a liability is something which is generally deteriorating, although it may be sold later. So a car is an example of this, where it kind of gets into a gray zone. A car is an asset because I can own this thing and I will sell it later on, but as I hold my car, the thing is just kind of rotting, right? Like quite literally in New England with salt on the roads. But we have this thing which is declining in value versus a home which is increasing in value. When we think about investments increase in value. If I think about most collector's items, they don't actually increase in value, right? Beanie Babies, whatever it is, unless you got a Charizard card, all of a sudden it's now worth, $250,000 or whatever. Generally, they don't pan out well. So hopefully, the sort of like math behind the scenes, along with the resources in the doc, help with that. And again, happy to help with any questions that come up. Hope you guys enjoy the project, and yeah, good stuff. Okay, bye.